Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm Robin. I'm a filmmaker and photographer based on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And today I want to talk to you about this. This is the roll of Kodak Ektachrome 100. Some people love it, some people hate it. Let's find out why. Kodak Ektachrome has been well known in the industry for the past 8 decades now, as it was released first in 1940s. It quickly became the backbone of Kodak film stocks for professionals but also consumers. And throughout the years, it evolved into many different film stock. You had Ektachrome 100 VS, Ektachrome 64, 64T for tungsten, Ektachrome G, and plenty of different type of Ektachrome suited for different occasions. And so it's no wonder that it quickly became one of the most popular film stock out there, and you could be sure to find at least one roll of Ektachrome into any photographer's bag, always there tucked away ready for action. Ektachrome was very suited for travel and nature photography, and that's probably one of the reasons why National Geographic decided to equip their photographer with this particular film stock when they were on assignment. And for that reason, if you ever flip through a National Geographic from the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, then you must have seen images shot on Ektachrome. You also probably saw images taken on Ektachrome through history books, archives, or photo books from that era. And it's because so many historical events from these past decades were captured using Ektachrome that it created such a strong legacy for that film stock. But then in the early 2000s, it died as more and more photographers replaced the role of Ektachrome for memory cards. Until in 2017, out of nowhere, I don't know if it's out of nowhere, but Kodak announced that they were working on a new emulsion for Ektachrome. Finally, 2 years later, in 2019, we started receiving our first roll of 35mm Ektachrome 100. The medium format arrived later on. I myself ordered 2 rolls of Ektachromes that arrived in March 2019, which I shot right away. First, let's talk about this new emulsion of Ektachrome 100. It's a daylight balance film with an ISO of 100. It uses the T-grain technology found into the Kodak T-Max black and white film for very fine grain and increased sharpness. Ektachrome 100 has a neutral contrast and true-to-life colors. And finally, the most important aspect of Ektachrome is that it is a color reversal film developed in E6. And the fact that you could develop Ektachrome in E6 was one of the reasons why Ektachrome was also more popular than his brother Kodachrome, because Kodachrome, although being an amazing film stock, could only be developed by a proprietary system made by Kodak. So not all of the film lab out there could develop Kodachrome, whereas most film labs could develop E6. And some of you may not know what's the difference between a color reversal film compared to your typical negative color film. First off, color reversal film is the same thing as slide film, which is the same thing as positive film. It's just 3 different names for the same thing. And what I have here is these 2 different types of film. You have the color reversal film, which was obviously Ektachrome 100, and then you have the color negative film, which was Kodak Gold 200. And so by looking at these 2 things, you can see the difference pretty well. So we'll start first with your typical negative. So this, when you send it to the lab, this is how it look like. It's usually, if it's color negative films, it will have this brown red base, and then your images are in the middles and they're negative. That's how they come out of the developing process. Then they need to be inversed to positive. That you would do that through scanning, or the lab would do it for you when they give you the scan, for example. So that's what you would get out of the lab. Then what you would get from an actual positive film is this. So you can see very well. I'll have an insert there, but out of the lab, when developing into E6, what you get from Ektachrome is the actual images already in positive. So although you call these negatives, they're in fact positive. They'll have a black base, and you can directly inspect those onto a light table and see what you have. You'll have the exact color, and you may have seen those into your attic, or maybe some photos from your grandparents or your parents mounted into little slides. And that's why it's called slide film, because you could ask your lab to mount each exposure into slide, and then could later be viewed onto a photo the thingy here. So you can understand why slide film became so popular, because unlike color negative film that needed to be printed into usually smaller format to put into a photo album, for example, with slide film mounted into slides, you could project all of those images onto a larger screen. And so the whole family could review all of those images together of the latest family trip, for example. Back in 2019, when I shot my first two roll of Ektachrome 100, I shot the first one between Vancouver and Whistler, and later on that summer, I shot the second roll in San Francisco. And being new to slide film, I didn't really know where to develop these Ektachrome rolls because they need to be developed in E6. And so I used a trip back to France to develop my Ektachrome to a lab that I knew there. And so obviously when I got the film back from the lab, I was quite eager to inspect those rolls of Ektachrome, because even when you receive the envelope and it's a lot of negative films, but then you have these two rolls of Ektachrome, or positive film, well, it really contrasts against the negatives. And obviously the first one you want to take a look at is the positive, because you can directly see what the images look like. But I didn't have a light table with me, so what I did was just taking the Ektachrome and looking at it through the window and have the light shine through. And my first reaction was like, look how adorable those tiny little pictures are. It feels like you're holding a tiny world through your hand that you can just look at. You have those bold, true-to-life colors that seem to be popping out from the film roll. And so I thought, yes, from now on, I'm only going to shoot Ektachrome, because straight out of the lab, it looks amazing. So back home, like the rest of my negatives, I use a Epson flatbed scanners to scan the Ektachrome. And that's when things started to get bad. All of those images that looked great when I looked at them through the window appeared underexposed and blue in Lightroom. So at first I thought I must have scanned them wrong. So I tried again and again and again. And regarding of the setting of the scanners, they always appeared very underexposed, muddy, and really just blue. So I tried to save those images into Lightroom, first of all with the white balance sliders all the way to the max, trying to bring back some warmth, but it didn't do much. And same with the exposure sliders, trying to raise up the overall exposure. But what it would do, it would just bring back that digital noise from the scanners in the very red pixels, and it made the image look even worse. And there is one image in particular that I remember. It was a red flower that I shot in San Francisco. When I looked at this image through the window, it looked great. You had the very bright red from the petals that contrasted with the green background of the leaves and shrubs, and it looked great. But back into Lightroom, it looked nothing alike. These red flowers was appearing brown, like when you got the ID, and then the background was just blue. There was no green, just blue, and the overall image was just underexposed, sorry. And I could try everything. I tried to mess up with the UN saturations. I tried to raise the exposure. Nothing worked, and that image that looked great against the window looked underexposed and dull into the computer. And I had similar results with two different rolls of Ektachrome shot at two different times. So I knew it wasn't something wrong with one particular roll, for example. So what I did was ask my friend Google, and he told me the story of many other photographers that got similar results when shooting Ektachrome, with having this very strong blue base that sometimes just took over the rest of the images. Even if they had other bright colors, the overall images would just look blue.
I'm afraid I just blew myself.
And funny enough, it looked like I used one of those Stephen Cool Day for Night filters in front of my lens to shoot all of those images. It was one of those filters used in filmmaking back in the days when they wanted to mimic shooting at night during the daytime. So obviously such poor results kind of cooled me down, and I stopped using Ektachrome for a while. The thing is, I never really was able to forget about Ektachrome. It always was into a corner of my head. I did more research about Ektachrome and slide film in general, and learn how slide film reacts to light, how it differs from color negative films, because these two types of film are very different. They react to light differently. You can shoot them, you have to shoot them differently as well. So all those research helped me better understand how to use slide film and Ektachrome in general. And I learned a few things about it. First of all, you cannot treat Ektachrome as a point-and-shoot type of film stock, like Kodak Portra 400, for example. You have to remember that slide film has less dynamic range than color negative films. Color negative films love light, so a roll of Portra 400, for example, can be overexposed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops if you want. It will have some color shift, but the photo will still be usable. With slide film, half a stop of difference can turn a good photo into a bad one. So if you use point-and-shoot cameras, I wouldn't load them with Ektachrome 100. Instead, I would use a more modern cameras or some cameras that are known to have very decent inboard light meters, or even use an external light meters just so you can get a better reading of the light and really dialed in your exposures to get the most optimum result using Ektachrome 100. I would also say that Ektachrome is more suited for landscape photographers when they can take more time to set up their shot using a tripod, really dialing in the settings to get the optimum exposure. Because if you do, and if you nail the exposure, you'll get those amazing, bold, true-to-life colors that many landscape photographers are seeking. And that's why I called Ektachrome a double-edged sword. If you nail the exposure, you're gonna get amazing result with bold colors that makes you feel like you're right there in the scene. In contrast, messing up the exposure can give you terrible results. Underexposing it will bring this blue base throughout the images with purple. It will just look awful. And if you overexpose it, let's say you overexpose the sky, it will just look transparent through the negatives and you'll have no information there. So by this point, I think you got the idea that you really need to pick up your battles when shooting Ektachrome 100. I wouldn't recommend that film stock on overcast day, but I have seen good results shooting mist and fog. Same, I wouldn't use Ektachrome indoor if you cannot control the light. So if you're using flashes, strobes, or any type of light into a studio environment, then maybe, but with uncontrolled light, I wouldn't recommend it. So if, like me, you used Ektachrome in the past but got poor results, I'm going to give you a couple of tips that you can use onto a next roll of Ektachrome to hopefully get better results. In general, when shooting negative color films, you probably heard that you should meter for the shadows or overexpose by a couple of stops your negative film. It's not the case with slide film. With slide film, you don't meters for the shadows nor the highlights, you have to meters for the midtones. That's why using an external light meter can help you as well to get better results, because you can get the incident lights onto your subject if you're shooting portraits, and you'll get a far better and more precise light reading. I would also stay away from very contrasty scene or shooting at harsh noon, for example. And if you do, you really need to get the exposure on the subject you want, because that will be well exposed, but the rest may be either overexposed or underexposed. Another tip, although a bit expensive, would be to bracket some of the scenes where you're unsure of the correct exposure. I would start by showing what the light meter is telling me to do, then half a stop above, half a stop below, note all of those different settings you've done, then get the lab to send you back your film and then review which one is the best. That way you'll also understand better how Ektachrome and slide film in general react to light. Another tip would be to use some sort of warming filters when using Ektachrome 100. Even if you wish to shoot Ektachrome at night, for example, I would use something like the Tiffen 81A or 81B to really warm up those tones, not too much, but ever so slightly, so it can counteract that blue base. Another type of filter you can try is the skylight type of filter. So it was skylight 1A, 1B, I believe. They were very popular back in the film times to counteract UV lights and also bring, again, some warmth and bring back those natural colors that you would on the scene onto your film. The first tip would be to ask your lab for one roll of Ektachrome to also make you the smallest prints available, so you can get a better idea of what Ektachrome is supposed to look like on paper. That way, when you are working on your scans, you can use these prints as references to really dial in your edits. The second tip would be to get a stronger light source with a CRI of 95 or above. I am using the Cinestill CS light source for scanning my own negatives, and I recently made a review about it that you can see in the link above. This light source is great because it's a different light mode. It has cool, neutral, and warm. And the warm mode is very useful for E6 slide film because, it warms up the whole negative and help you get better results. So at first, slide images scan using the warm light mode on a light source will appear really warm, but I found it's actually easier to cool down scan images than warming them up. The third tip would be to pay attention to the histogram when scanning your film using a mirrorless camera, and not to what the camera is telling you the correct exposure is, because by looking at the histogram, you'll have a better idea of what's included into the raw file. When shooting Ektachrome 100, I would say that there is a steeper learning curve than with any other type of color negative films, because you really need to understand how slide films react to light. I would say that Ektachrome is more suited for professional photographers or for people that already have some sort of experience shooting slide film. But like I said so many times throughout this video, if you nail the exposure of Ektachrome and you shoot it right, you'll get some amazing colors. And I find it's hard to go back to other type of film stock when looking at how good Ektachrome looks. The other catch with that film stock would be its price. I mean, looking at it right now, this roll of Ektachrome in Canada cost me $29.99 before taxes. When I looked at the B&H website in the States, it was $21. So it's something to keep in mind, and that doesn't include the development because Ektachrome needs to be developed in E6. Not all of the labs provide E6, and it's generally more expensive than the standard C41. So overall, shooting Ektachrome is really expensive, so it's something to keep in mind when you're shooting it. To conclude, I would say that this new emulsion of Ektachrome 100s continue the strong legacy that Ektachrome has. And the funny thing is that Ektachrome died in the early 2000s because of digital cameras. But this new emulsion is the closest thing to what a digital sensor can produce, which makes Ektachrome the perfect stock for hybrid shooters. Because Ektachrome is able to reproduce those true-to-life colors while retaining the soft tones of film and also having this Kodak signature look that the company has been refining all of those years. That's it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review of Kodak Ektachrome 100 and that it inspired you to pick up a roll of Ektachrome and try it for yourself. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so I can do more of this video in the future. See you next time.